Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a show for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to many friends as Mags.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Global Missions Podcast, the first of Season 7. A big welcome to any new listeners who may be joining us for the first time, and a big welcome to those who have been with us before. Remember, if you like this program, we invite you to subscribe. We post new episodes every 2 weeks, and we ask that you consider leaving us a review in your podcast app. We hope you've enjoyed the new episodes we produced over the summer. If you haven't been connected, we did episodes including singles in missions ministry, an episode about persecution in the Christian life, including missions, and an episode about finding your own place in God's great big story. Typically in the past, we have had encore episodes during the summer. That was not the case this year, so make sure you didn't miss anything. Finally, this is the last announcement. We're looking forward to the official launch of the Global Missions Toolbox this fall. If you'd like to be informed about this new multi-agency initiative to bless the senders, pastors, missions committees, and the family and friends of mission workers, stop by our site, globalmissionstoolbox.com, and get on the launch list there. Now, on to today's conversation. The discussion about financial support of Christian missionaries has been going on, at least, I suppose, since Paul was sent as a missionary from Antioch. Now, in the 21st century, many churches and missionaries and agencies are wrestling with the best ways to provide financially for God's work. Today, we'll dip into this important topic with someone dealing daily with the question of financial support for missionaries. Our guest today is Jennifer Nichols, who is an experienced mission worker herself, having previously lived in South Africa and Zambia. She there was assisting churches in developing youth and community outreach programs. She has also visited over 20 countries for the purpose of engaging, equipping, and leading short-term initiatives. Today, Jennifer serves as a stewardship coach with Team, working directly with mission workers to help them develop a healthy financial support base, as well as a healthy partnership with their agency Team. She's married with 3 kids and works remotely from Washington State. Jennifer, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are glad to engage this conversation with you today, a financial topic which really tends to get the juices flowing, both for mission workers, of course, missionaries as they're getting ready to go, and for the churches who send them out. Really looking forward to our discussion. Just before we get to our main topic, would you just take a few minutes and share just a little bit about your experience helping missionaries raise support?
Like you mentioned, I work with Team, which stands for the Evangelical Alliance Mission, and I've been with Team for the past 5 years, really in the role of working with our new midterm and long-term missionaries before they leave for the field, so raising a healthy partnership team. And then I also work with our missionaries who are on home assignment and those who are out in the field who just need a little bit extra help and resources and coaching in the terms of just redeveloping or reconnecting with their sending church and just raising additional financial partners to keep them doing God's work around the world.
Well, I know from experience and from our agency as well that having a coach come alongside can just be a great encouragement. Sometimes helps with accountability and setting up a plan. We just believe as we begin exploring this topic that God provides for those he calls. And yet we need to figure that out creatively and flexibly in this changing world. So today we're going to talk with Jennifer about 2 of the primary financial models. We're going to call them financial models, just generally. 2 of those models for sending out and supporting missionaries financially. So the first of these, Jennifer, we're going to call the traditional model. What do you mean by the traditional model of sending missionaries?
Yeah, the traditional model is probably something that most people are accustomed to, where a missionary family or a single or a couple raises their financial partners through churches and individuals who will support them on a monthly or one-time basis to be in the field to do the things that have been called to.
Mm-hmm. And this could come from a single church, right? Or sometimes spread across various churches for a family?
Right. Yeah, we have, I'd say it's a pretty wide range within our organization of some people have just one sending church, other people who have maybe 3 or 4 churches who are involved with them. And then there's some who have maybe up to 10 churches who have joined them and are involved with the vision and ministry in that particular country that they serve in.
Well, today we're going to talk about blessings and challenges along the way. Just as we talk about that element, Jennifer, having just one or maybe a very few supporting churches or many, what are some of the blessings and challenges that fit both of those situations? Say the blessings of challenges of just having 1 or 2 sending churches.
Well, I think part of a blessing of that is that when the missionary comes back for home assignment, a time period where they're back in their passport country, that if they only have 1 or 2 churches that are supporting them, that's only 1 or 2 churches they need to kind of plug back into and spend time with. The challenge with someone who may have 8 or 9 churches is that they're traveling to really make sure they're connecting well with each one of those congregations that support them. Some people, that's the way it works. Either they have, different family members who are part of different churches, or they've moved a lot. So they have people who are excited and congregations who want to get on board, which is super exciting. Part of that challenge, I know a lot of times they're like, so for this month, I'm in this city visiting these churches. Next month, we're going to travel to this city and visit these churches. And so it can feel a little like you're spreading yourself thin on your home assignment time.
Right. Especially if those sending churches are far apart.
Right.
I was just going to say, because it does seem it would be positive maybe to have fewer. On the challenge side of that, we have seen in some cases when a lot of support has come from a single church or just a very few churches, and there's been significant change in the economic region of those sending churches or change in the church itself. Because so much of the support comes from that single or few places, it dramatically affects the support of the missionary, even to the point they've had to return home. On the other side is the blessing of having that diversified, if I could say it that way, and spread and shared. So there are blessings and challenges in both environments. This traditional model, Jennifer, has been around for a long time. It's considered the traditional model for good reason. Is it still relevant today? Does it still work? Should we still do it?
Yes, I think it is still relevant because it's biblical. It's God's idea. You can find examples throughout the Old and New Testament of God calling all of us to be a part of the Great Commission. So it is very much a part of God's plan and calling all believers to get to be either goers or senders and that involvement in the Great Commission. So I think it is something that we still should continue to be invested and involved in and excited about as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We do see that some of our new mission workers, you've described for team, and many agencies have these new, they're called appointees or people who are getting ready to go. They have expressed some reluctance about the traditional model. Have you experienced that in your coaching, just a reluctance?
Yes, I would say that there are definitely people who come, and this is kind of that big mountain they have to climb of not really excited or embracing support development.
So just explore that a little bit. Why do you think, what do you see? Why are they reluctant?
I think a lot of people have some fear maybe in that. They don't want to ask. I think sometimes people do struggle with the idea of asking others for help, especially in the realm of finances. I think a lot of times Christians put maybe the financial world, literally look at it as something sacred, that it is part of God's plan and understanding what we have as God's and how we can give that back to Him. So I think a lot of people do approach it with some fear. Oh, I got to talk to people who are close to me or not that close to me about financial support, especially if you're stepping away from a career. That can be a really big transition and shift for a lot of people to have to kind of work through that process. I really do see attitude and perspective is something that people really need to wrestle through and grasp to embrace this of really that obstacle to funding your ministry is really a lot of times our attitude towards funding our ministry. When we can kind of take maybe that whole idea of fundraising out of the picture and really look at what does partnership development look like and what is God's plan for this and what does the Bible have to say about it, and really starting to embrace it as a privilege and an actual ministry. So we get this amazing opportunity to sit down with people and share what God's doing in the particular part of the world that we feel called to, and really get to share that vision and passion and ask people to be a part of that Great Commission with us, I think is a really exciting thing. And it should be embraced as a very joyful privilege. And I find with a lot of appointees that I coach who kind of come into this with that reluctant or, I just don't want to have to do this. They view it as that necessary evil. I'm excited about missions, but I'm not excited about this part. That comes across, but I find that when people can really make that shift in their perspective and their attitude, and they begin to embrace it, they're actually really joyful about this process and learn to engage it with just excitement. And they do start to see it as the ministry that it is and get excited about meeting with people and sharing with churches and sitting down and really sharing, hey, I want to tell you what God's doing in this part of the world. And I think that it opens up both people's global awareness of what's going on in that place of the world. So I think it can be a very exciting thing.
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask what you would say. You've answered that already, but I love the way you turned that to say it's an element, it's a part of the ministry, actually, to be doing the support raising. It's part of God's design. It's biblical. And it can be a real blessing to the senders. Regular listeners of this podcast know we talk about goers. That's the mission worker going. But the senders, that we invite them into what God is doing and honor them in that way. We will talk about resources later, but when you talk about the changing the mindset, are there any resources or reading books I'm headed toward here, I guess, the readings that you've mentioned that would help people get a good perspective on this traditional model and their attitude?
Actually, a required resource for people coming into team is the book called Spirituality of Fundraising by Henry Nouwen. And I highly recommend it for anyone who is a little fearful or a little hesitant about this whole process of support development. But I also highly recommend it for anyone who serves on a missions committee or who helps send missionaries to the field, of taking the time to sit down and read this, maybe read it together as a group and really go through and look at what is this saying to us as a church or us as a group of people who send.
Excellent advice. It's a fine little book, and it's very accessible. It's a very small little book. I wonder, just as we turn for a minute toward the committee here, Jennifer, what advice do you have for missions committees as they consider still sending missionaries out with this model? What do they need to consider in these days?
I think they need to remember that this is still a very important model, that there's a lot of places in the world that missionaries need to go and get into, and they need the backing and support of their church. They need the prayer support and they need the financial support. So I think when you're looking at your missions budget, of making sure that there's an adequate plan and good budgeting for who are those within our congregation that we stand behind and that we send, and we want to send them well. That's a huge piece of it, of looking at how do we best engage and support our missionaries. Yeah, just really engaging with your missionary and spending time and talking about what does this look like to send you as an extension of our congregation to this place in the world, and how can we kind of get behind you and be a part of this with you as a church.
That's super. What I hear you saying actually is that this model remains while we talk about another model then, and I want to come to this second financial model, but we're not saying either or, right? We're saying this is going to be a wise discernment between two models, or maybe blending models.
Definitely. I think there's a lot of creative ways that people can be involved in sending overseas and engaged in working with people overseas, and that we see different things come out from that, and different ways that we can be a part of people who have the desire to go.
That's good. Well, this second financial model, we have simply entitled the Vocational Model. It's maybe self-explanatory, but let's just take a minute, Jennifer. When we say vocational model, what are you referring to?
We're looking at a couple different options. Maybe there's family, or maybe one person has a job or a part-time job or a full-time job in a certain country that allows them to get that visa and to get into that country, but they have the desire and intent to be partnered with a mission agency, to be missional, have a missional focus while they're there.
So they may be working for another firm, but they're there on purpose. In other words, to be message bearers, to bring the gospel to that area.
Yes.
Now, this can be mixed and matched in a whole bunch of different ways. Married couples, for example. Do you know of examples where one of a married couple, one of the spouses is working and the other is maybe not an employee of a local firm or an international firm?
Yeah, we've had this come up within team. We've had cases where maybe a family has gone out where both spouses went out as the missionary. And after about 2 years of doing language and culture, one person in that marriage is actually getting a job in that country, and it helps them stay in that country and kind of have a little bit more legitimacy that that country needs them to have. But they, as a family, want to stay connected and intentional in doing ministry. And the other spouse has roles within the organization and within the ministry area that they want to continue developing in and leading in and being a part of. So we've kind of seen that. We've seen some singles, thinking of single people, someone having maybe a part-time job, being able to be in the country because of that. But then also, once again, that intentional focus of wanting to be partnered with a missions agency to connect and to serve as well.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you mentioning both married couples or families as well as singles. And if you're a regular listener of the podcast, you might know that we recently did an episode on how to care for singles in particular. We would encourage you to check out that episode as well. We do have an example in the agency I serve with where we've got singles working. I'm thinking of one gal who's a nurse, and her entire income comes from working as a nurse in that ministry context, but she is considered a full member of our team as well. And as a result, in that case, she actually has to raise in the traditional model a very, very small amount of support in order to have a very sustainable presence and legitimate presence in that ministry context. I wonder whether you've also seen it where it works well for singles, Jennifer?
We have seen that as well. We've had either singles who had a student visa, part of a university for a while. That's not necessarily a job, but maybe a different way that they're in the country, and then that's their focus. But we've also seen some singles who have had a part-time job or a little bit more than part-time. But also, yeah, the desire there is to connect with a ministry area, to be missional as well.
Super. Well, in just a few minutes, we're going to ask Jennifer to interact with us a little more on how these models fit together, can be blended to support missionaries on the field. Just before we get to that part of the conversation, we'd like to share with you this missions resource that we hope will be helpful to you and your church.
Would you like to learn more about missions? Perspectives is a dynamic 15-week course where you'll learn more about God's global purpose and how He's at work in the world. You can hear more about Perspectives right here on the Global Missions Podcast by listening to episode 14 with Wayne Matthews. Go to perspectives.org or perspectivescanada.org to find a course near you. And now, back to today's conversation.
We're back with Jennifer Nichols, who serves as a stewardship coach with Team, and we're discussing some current financial models for sending out missionaries. Jennifer, we've tried to say we have these two general models, but they can exist together. And you've mentioned before we started recording, especially about the international church. I wonder if you just unpack that particular scenario that you've seen work well.
Definitely. So there's international churches that serve congregations all over the world, and we've definitely have had some cases where there is a pastor who is employed by a church or gets an invitation to come be on that international church staff. But as the employer or as a family, there's also that desire to partner with a missions organization to just have that partnership for the sake of the gospel. And so we've definitely been able to help send people to an international church where they are members of that international church and serving that church community, but also their desire is to partner with a missions organization to be involved in that ministry area, to have kind of a broader context of ministry, if you will.
Right. And in that case, what you mean is that international church, the body of Christ there, employs that worker, right? There and provides then some of the finances.
Yes. So thinking of an instance last year where we had a family leave for an international church, they still raised support in the traditional model, but they also had, I guess you could say, support or salary from that international church as well. So their budget looked a little bit different than if a family was going to that country on a traditional model. Their budget probably would look different than that family who was employed by the international church because they were receiving a stipend from them or a salary from them. So yeah, they kind of had that hybrid situation where they did speak with churches and raise support. You could say that dollar amount was a little bit less than maybe somebody else who might be going to that country without that extra stipend.
And what did you find the understanding and the perspective of the senders here in North America? How did they feel about that hybrid model?
I think a lot of people understood it. I think with anyone getting ready to go overseas, good communication is just key and necessary, of knowing how to explain your budget well, and especially if you are raising financial partners to do this together with, of really being able to explain your budget well and really help share with people. Yes, we're getting a salary, but that salary doesn't necessarily cover all the needs that maybe our family has in that country, and especially since we want to be intentional about partnering with a missions agency.
Well, it's helpful to hear about it being blended together in some cases by another church body that receives a worker, like an international church. Another model that we have seen in a nearby agency is a sequence of hybrid. And so by that, what I mean is in sequence, there was a need early on for the traditional model, but that was replaced because this worker went to start a business. But before that business was fully online, there were I could say, almost classical mission tasks. The family needed to learn the language, needed to learn the culture of the place they were serving, and they needed to get their business set up. Well, that business wasn't set up yet, so it couldn't support them as tent makers. And we have other episodes that kind of unpack tent making and business as mission. But in that initial phase, they needed very traditional missionary support. But then that also was reduced over time as that business came online. So there are a number of ways that these models of the traditional support raising from God's people and their generosity, which is biblical, and this vocational model can be blended together. Do you find that missions committees are typically open-minded about these financial strategies or blending them together? What are you finding among the churches?
I think it's a matter of different churches have different views on how they send and what that looks like. As a missions committee member, if you have maybe a couple that comes to you and maybe they have this hybrid model in place of discounting the fact that they still need financial support. I think sometimes when you hear, one spouse has a job or a part-time job or a stipend, you think, then you don't really need support, and not really legitimizing that the other spouse is the missionary as well and that they are raising support and do need the financial partnership. So I think of embracing it and talking it through. I think good missions committees are ones who really do want to sit down with the ones that they are sending and look through those budgets, look through that calling, really talk it through together of what that would look like to send from that church. So I think those things are key. In some of just our situations that I've mentioned, there's been a lot of individuals in churches who are excited about what these families or singles are doing and want to be a part of the work that's happening. So that's exciting to see.
Well, in a moment, I'm going to ask Jennifer if she's got a word of encouragement or advice to missions committees. Many of our listeners, of course, do serve on missions committees, maybe helping to influence and even rethink financial models, Jennifer. I wonder if anyone would like to follow up with you. If they've got follow-up questions on these models or on the coaching, how could they reach out to you?
Well, you can definitely email me, and I'd love to connect and we can talk more about this. My email, I believe, is going to be out there, but it is jennifer.nichols@team.org. So you can definitely send me an email and I'd love to connect and talk more about this.
Thank you for being available that way. And we do take show notes for each episode of the Global Missions Podcast. You can find that on our website, globalmissionspodcast.com. And Jennifer's contact information will be there, as well as a few resources that we've collected from this conversation about financial models and support raising. Jennifer, if you had the opportunity to stand in front of a missions committee, perhaps the pastors are there as well. They're serving faithfully in the local church. They want to do a great job of missions. Considering this topic of finances and financial models, what would you like to say to this group?
As someone who's serving to send, one of the things that comes to mind, I love in the New Testament how the author of Romans uses a lot of us language. It's not about you or them. It's about us with that message of the gospel that's been entrusted to all of us and how we are all invited to participate and not just be spectators. And then I love in Philippians where it just shows that beautiful relationship of where the church and the missionary just need each other. You can speak into each other's lives. And I think a lot of times as a church looking at that missionary, this is someone that you've raised in a sense, you've been a part of their discipleship process. Yes, you may be sad that they're leaving, but also joyful in the sense of you're extending someone from your congregation to a different place in the world to be that light, to share the gospel in creative and fun and challenging and great ways, and a lot of ways to be a part of that. So I think for missions committee of really ask good questions, be in good conversations with your missionaries, really talk with the agency that they're going with, get a good handle on what does training look like? How can we be involved? How can we send them well? Some churches have a really defined process, and that's great. Other churches that we've worked with, they may be a new church plan or newer to sending missionaries. That's okay too. A lot of organizations like Team, we have a lot of great resources for churches of just how to be a good sender, how to be involved with your missionary. I think that's a huge blessing that you can have with that missionary of just wanting to be involved, whether that means going to visit at some point, how to pray for them, but also financially being involved. It is a little deflating when a missionary will come back and be like, my church wants nothing, can't really, or doesn't want to financially partner. So kind of looking through and talking through what are our policies on that? How can we support missionaries? I know that they're kind of, can't say yes to everyone, but having a defined kind of mission sending protocol is great. But really working well with your missionaries and just having those good conversations. I always encourage missionaries when you're new to go and sit down with the body at your church who's in charge of sending and just really ask, what does it look like to send from this church? And have that good conversation of what are some of those expectations that you have of me as a missionary and that I might have of you of the church, and really kind of work through some of those. So I think as you are looking to send or you are already sending, that is wonderful. And I think that really engaging in this ministry together and really being a part of that together is a really beautiful thing. And I think just a really beautiful biblical partnership that we can see play out, which is really exciting.
Well, I appreciate very much you including both the goer and the sender. And thanks for your ministry as a coach. May the Lord bless you with wisdom and discernment as you encourage and provide accountability in all that you do. And it's been a real pleasure to have you with us today on the Global Missions Podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, we hope you found this conversation with Jennifer to be helpful in thinking through various models of supporting mission workers. Remember to stop by globalmissionstoolbox.com and subscribe if you'd like to receive updates on the upcoming launch. And today's episode is brought to you by the Global Missions Toolbox, produced by Send International in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. On behalf of the team, thanks for listening. We invite you to join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.